Hello, welcome to the GXM podcast, where we explore news and topics around video game music and the intersection between the games and music industries. We aim to publish fortnightly, although we have been failing to do so thus far in 2024, but we're doing our best. But please be sure to subscribe and, of course, spread the news and share the word about GXM. My name is Tom Quillfeldt. I am Community Manager and A&R for Laced Records, which is a video game soundtrack label. I also podcast with the Cane and Rinse crew. Joining me is my co-host Mat Ombler, who's Head of Gaming Partnerships at Laced, who also writes about video game music. Matt, has it just been wall-to-wall Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for the last few days?
It has been non-stop Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, except it arrived on Thursday because obviously it was a weird release day where it came out on February the 29th. I wasn't in at the time. It went to the post office. Like a good boy, I left it there until late afternoon on Friday, knowing that if I had have picked it up any earlier or on Thursday, I would have probably neglected my work responsibilities. For the most part, I've been a responsible gamer, although I have done nothing but play that game religiously Saturday, Sunday, and then probably for the rest of the week and for the foreseeable future until I'm done with it. What about yourself?
Well, I picked it up. I have played a couple of hours. I've just finished the flashback sequence. No spoilers. And I went to extremes because I know that I'm not going to get too much TV time being, marriage, as you are, but, not that much TV time. So I've also got a PlayStation Portal because some stock became available. So the only problem is my birthday's soon, so I've had to hide it from the kids so that I can then put it back in its box and then gift it to myself for my birthday, and they'll be like, oh, what's that? But it's actually a device solely for the purpose of getting in enough Rebirth time while my wife wants to watch, Bridgerton for the 86th time. I want to say quickly about Pierre Crochat's Now Playing newsletter. Last time out, we said incorrectly that it was Substack. He used to be on Substack. He's now on Patreon, and his monthly selections is now a mixtape published as a podcast on major DSPs. You can find all the links for that on nowplaying.cool. And I honestly recommend that you do. He's doing it. He's listening to all of the indie stuff, all of the AAA stuff. He's actually listening to all of these tracks in these OSTs and giving a genuine kind of critique and analysis of them. So it's well worth checking out. Okay, let's get on to the news. First up, Bear McCreary, who is the composer of God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. So this isn't a video game music story so much as adjacent to. He's announced an extremely ambitious, glitzy album campaign for The Singularity, which is going to be an epic rock concept album, graphic novel and concert experience from the mind of Grammy-nominated and Emmy and BAFTA award-winning composer Bear McCreary. Also worth mentioning, the guest list for this is ridiculous. You've got people like Slash, Serge Tankian, Rufus Wainwright, Corey Taylor from Slipknot, Joe Satriani. It's embarrassing. And in there, he also has Mega Ran, who is the rapper, sort of best known for his video game adjacent kind of arrangements and rap albums. Very talented guy. And Eivor, who was one of the singers on the God of War Ragnarok soundtrack. So yeah, it's a pretty huge project. It's coming out May 10th, 2024, so still a long wait. He's obviously been putting a lot into it. Matt, are you looking forward to checking this out?
I'm just so curious because there's such a diverse range of do you know what I mean? So Corey Taylor, Slipknot, massive. Serge Tankian, System of a Down, absolutely massive, and heavy bands. But then you've got Ben Wainman from the Dillinger Escape Plan, who are basically a mathcore, weird, eccentric metal band. So that's a really left field choice for something like this. Similarly, you've got S.A. Jones from We Are Pigs. There's like some really cool bands involved with this. So I'm just trying to piece all of this together and imagine what this might sound like. And so far, I have no...
Well, have you heard the Rufus Wainwright track?
No, I didn't know that was out.
Yeah, he's dropped that already. It's not, it's not a Rufus Wainwright track by any, standard in terms of, I don't know, timbre and tone and stuff. It's really big and epic, as you imagine it would be. Is Bear trying to grow beyond soundtrack work? Is he he's clearly trying to put himself on the map here with this. I mean, it's more ambitious really than even John Williams did compositions outside of film work, and I'm struggling to think of a sort of famed soundtrack composer who really crossed over and had a kind of huge successful release outside of their home medium, as it were. But it seems super ambitious, and I'm sure lots of people from the video game industry will come out to support it and be seen shouting about it. I'm looking forward to it. I like Bear's music a lot. I love his last few soundtracks, and seems... But I just don't know where he got the time.
No.
He's got his... It's crazy.
That's what I mean. But you know what? I'm hoping, like... I love the idea of him doing this project and then really hitting it off with certain people. Like, let's say, for example, like his work with Corey Taylor on this album. Him and Corey are now like bezies, and it's just like, you know what, this game soundtrack I'm working on in the future. Corey, do you just want to get in and maybe do some vocals? Or Serge, like, System of a Down aren't doing anything nowadays. Like, maybe next game soundtrack you want in. Like, I'm excited to see what comes of the friendships off the back of this, do you know what I mean? Because it's interesting, like, how did he pick these people? Like, presumably they're artists that he knows, at least some of them, but then surely there's others where it's probably people that he listens to. He strikes me as a bit of a metalhead, so I imagine at his stage in his career now, he can reach out to people and people will similarly be like, oh my God, like, yeah, we'd love to work with you. So I just want to hear the Ben Wayman track, honestly. I just want to hear that, because Dillinger Escape Plan is sick, and that's going to sound hilarious.
Serge sang on Metal Hellsinger, among other things, and also did a single recently with Tina Guo, who is the cellist who played on the original Journey soundtrack with Austin Wintory, and she's had a, incredibly glitzy career as a kind of concert cellist and recording cellist on just a bunch of stuff, including with Hans Zimmer live. And so, yeah, I think there's just a kind of a network, really, of big media composers like Hans Zimmer. Like Zimmer, I think Bear McCreary's angling to kind of have a dual career as a kind of a big music artist and a big person within the scene, as well as being a, extremely sought-after game composer.
Fun fact before we move on to the next story, Serge Tankian also composed an entire soundtrack for a mobile game called Midnight Star in 2015, which is basically just like a quite naff futuristic sci-fi shooting game that's no longer even available to play, but he did the full soundtrack for that, which is just, it's different. On to VR concerts, because quite frankly, there's been absolutely loads of these. Meta's Horizon Worlds has a experience called Music Valley, which has done VR concerts featuring the likes of Blackpink, Kid Laroi. These are so successful that they're now happening every week, or if not every week, every other week. And this has really helped Meta kind of carve a name for itself in the VR concert space. Now it looks like there is a new platform hoping to take a chunk of that pie, which is Amaze VR Concerts. They have just released their first VR concert with the rock/metal band Avenged Sevenfold. That is now available on Apple Vision Pro and Meta Quest VR. Avenged Sevenfold, quite a forward-thinking band, especially when it comes to video games and new tech. They've done quite a lot of things with Call of Duty. Recently released that Fortnite experience, which was just a game they made to promote a new song in Unreal Edit for Fortnite. I think everyone got overexcited, including me, thinking it was going to be like an in-game like experience as part of Epic. But all of these concerts are, I no longer have a Quest headset, and I am thinking of trying to pick up another one and see what the fuss is about, just because that's the one thing I've not done yet, really watch like a proper VR concert. Is that anything you've had a chance to try yet?
VR has never sat very well with me, unfortunately, in terms of motion sickness, but also I have no room anywhere, any surface in the house to keep a VR headset, let alone any time to actually use the flipping thing. So unfortunately to me, it smacks of kind of just, you know, a very rarefied audience for these things. I know that the Meta Quest is excellent, of course, and rave reviews and very comfy and everything like that. They're all good headsets. It's just, you know, Apple Vision Pro's $3,500 or whatever it is. So this all feels very distant to me, unfortunately.
And I've got a spare $3,500 just to drop on a headset.
Got a spare $3,500 to drop on a new boiler and you know, radiators and stuff like that.
Avenged Sevenfold are worth it, surely.
I don't know what it's going to take to properly draw me into a virtual concert, like day one, be excited for it, even pick up hardware. It could be Radiohead, you know, someone like that, like a band from my teenage years that I really love, you know, or Bjork or someone like that who does something so amazing and kind of headline-y that I feel like I've just got to be there. So I borrow whatever it is, a Meta Quest for the weekend and check it out or something like that. But at the moment, these are artists that don't hold much appeal for me.
No, you know what, I think I'd love to see, and I don't understand why they've not done it yet, I'd love to see Sony Music do something like this through the PlayStation. Like, do you know what I mean? Just the main UX, you log on, and similar to like what Meta have got with Meta Horizon Worlds, there's just a world like that for Sony. I mean, ironically, PlayStation actually had that, didn't they, with that PlayStation Home thing?
Which was a lot of fun back in the PS3 early PS3 days. But I mean, that comment in the context of like 900 people being laid off from Sony, including the whole of London studio, which was dedicated.
Oh God, yeah.
To making VR games in recent years. So if anyone was going to do it, it was going to potentially be a studio. You know, I don't want to speak too soon. I'm sure there's other talent in Sony that could make a VR thing like that. Maybe it is in development, who knows, but it certainly seems with the economic climate and the layoffs that VR has, if it was even lower of a priority than it already was before, it is now not as high a priority as it is for a company like Meta.
Agreed.
Moving on, my favourite musician of all time, Nobuo Uematsu, I think he said things like this before. And he's had some very serious ill health, which he, as I understand it, recovered from somewhat. He doesn't think he'll ever compose a whole game again. Now, this is the chap who composed the full soundtracks for Final Fantasies 1 through 9, as well as helping out on Final Fantasy Tactics and a few other games at Squaresoft back in the day. And he still was around for most of Final Fantasy X. He's done theme songs for the Final Fantasy series going forward. I think he did a lot for Final Fantasy XIV before it became Realm Reborn. And I think the last full soundtrack might be, if I'm not mistaken, Fantasian for Mistwalker, which is the company run by Hironobu Sagakachi. But it's not that much of a surprise. I mean, he's been around a long, long, long time. He's had some ill health. I hope and pray that his royalties give him a fat check every month or whatever. So he just seems like he's having fun at the moment. I think he did say this kind of thing publicly recently, that he wanted to do more like personal projects, fun things. So he's got his, we mentioned this in the interview with Mark Robbins later, who's been associated with Meridian Studios. Nobuo was tasked with following in the footsteps of Yoko Shimomura and composing a family concert of completely original music. Uematsu's show will be called Meridian Heart of Ice, which has a story developed by Thomas Booker, who is the Meridian producer of many, many concerts, including the Final Symphony concerts. So he's got his Kon-Tiki band with him, Uematsu, when he does tours recently and things. So it seems like he's in a more chill place, and that he doesn't really want, you know, someone giving him a spreadsheet of cues to slave over for a long time.
No, I think as far as like composing a video game score, he's done everything that he wanted to do. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what else he could really do in the gaming space that would get him excited when he's got more opportunities now to do his own original stuff. But I do just like the idea because obviously like him and Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, they're like really close friends. I think that's why Uematsu was like, I'll do one last soundtrack with you. I love the idea of like Sakaguchi just being on like a beach in Hawaii. I think he lives out in Hawaii. And Uematsu just going to find him and like Sakaguchi turning around and just being like, I thought you'd retired, you son of a bitch. And like them two just like, what one more soundtrack like before we call it quits? He's like, yeah, and then that's it. And then we get Final Fantasy IX remake times 10 or whatever.
Well, on the one hand, you've got the partnership of Joe Hisaishi and director Hayao Miyazaki with the Studio Ghibli films. And Miyazaki, tried to retire over and over again. It's like it was always his last film until he did another one. And he's, an extremely old man now, but just wanted to keep working. And it seems like Hisaishi will always be there to provide the score if he possibly can. So who knows what the future will hold for Sakaguchi and Uematsu, but for now it sounds like he's chilling, he's doing different things that are more enjoyable to him. And the other thing is, of course, that Square Enix has an enormous stable of incredibly talented composers who have come through in the wake of not just Uematsu but Masashi Hamauzu, who's approaching retirement, if not semi-retired already. The Final Fantasy series and the associated series like Bravely Default, Octopath Traveler, all the other RPGs around Square Enix, they've just brought so much composition talent through. The huge team that worked on Final Fantasy VII remake with all of their different arrangers as well as the headline composers. I mean, they've got the staff, they've got the talent, I think, now to forge a new kind of destiny for Final Fantasy. We've seen that with Final Fantasy 14 and 16 composer Masayoshi Soken. I mean, he's been around for a while now as well. So, I think Uematsu's legacy is firmly secure, and as is the sort of talent pipeline that follows him.
Outside of music for JRPGs, we have got music for League of Legends. I thought this was an interesting collaboration that I just wanted to talk up a little bit because this is the first time a Latin American artist has collaborated with Riot Games. So this is a Argentinian rapper called Lit Killer, which is one hell of a name. So he's released a song called My Clan for League of Legends. He is an avid League of Legends fan. He's been playing the game for a long time. And if you've not heard of Lit Killer, he has 8.9 million followers on Instagram, 11.4 monthly listeners on Spotify. And the song, which has only been posted to the Latin America YouTube channel for League of Legends, already has 200k views, and it's only been up for a couple of days at the time of recording. This is a really cool example of a music company working with regional talent rather than just picking from the biggest and the best names that are out there. Call of Duty did a similar strategy for the launch of the latest Modern Warfare game where they worked with rappers in France. Bandai just did a similar thing for the launch of Tekken 8 where they partnered with DEE for a Tekken 8 anthem. So it's great to see game studios working with talent that you might class as more local, because I think you get some really cool songs that come out of that, and you also get to activate kind of regional fandoms and also showcase some exciting genres of music.
Matt, you've heard of globalization.
I have.
You've heard of the word local.
Are we going to glocalize? Have
you heard of glocalization?
I have heard of glocalization. I do like that.
Will Page, who used to be Spotify's head economist, he was at the PRS for Music before that. He did a round of interviews a while back about glocalization, and he was talking about video games. I think we spoke about that on this podcast, actually. And generally the idea is that if you look at chart data a lot of different regions and territories and countries are sticking more to local language artists than they previously did. And the kind of power of the American soft power, English language soft power of British American artists doing really well in Nigeria, Norway, wherever you want to look, Korea, has been weakened. And so there's this idea of, on a global scale, markets are looking more locally for chart-topping artists. And so that collaboration between League of Legends and Lit Killer kind of speaks to that, I would say. Latin American music is mainstream music to a certain extent, especially in the wake of songs like Despacito. Yeah, it seems really smart. Our guest this week is Mark Robbins, who happens to be UK PR manager at Bethesda, but we're talking to him in his capacity as the campaign driver all the way back more than 10 years ago now for the campaign to get video game music in the Classic FM Hall of Fame. Now, Classic FM is a UK radio station, although I'm sure they broadcast globally now on the internet and all that stuff. He decided that the Hall of Fame, deserved to have some video game artists in it. And so we talked about the history of what drove him to kind of push on social media to get some votes in for it, and their kind of wild success in the early few years. The whole point of chatting now is that the deadline, hopefully you hear this before then, is March 15th for voting in the Classic FM Hall of Fame 2024. If you want to hear people like Nobuo Uematsu or Yoko Shimomura get up in the charts, then definitely get to their website and get voting. Okay, so I'd like to welcome to GXM Mr. Mark Robbins. Mark, you currently work at Bethesda as a PR manager?
I do. That is my current role and has been for some time, although in terms of me, I'm what they call a games industry veteran, because I've worked in the industry for, I think, about 65 years. Or at least it feels like that. But no, 24 years this year.
24 years? At what point do you tip over to being a veteran?
That's a great question. I think it's when you feel tired all the time.
When you've just had one too many internet nonsense blow-ups to care anymore.
Possibly. Yeah. But no, a long time. I started as a journalist working on a lot of print magazines. So print magazines of like the early noughties and mid-noughties I would have worked across. And then I switched to PR, which is what a lot of journalists do when they need to get a mortgage. And have worked across a whole bunch of agencies and different games, but at Bethesda now. I guess also a big video game music fan and have been for a long time.
Yeah. So when did that... Were you always a fan of video game music for that whole career so far and before, or is it something that's grown over time?
No. I think so. I was always... Right back to when I had my first gaming computer, which would have been a Spectrum Plus 2. So that's really aging me now. And then I had a friend who had a C64, and it was always, who has the best? I mean, that was the console war at that time, right? It was Spectrum against Commodore 64. But I used to love the music on his computer. So we used to occasionally swap computers, because the Spectrum had more games, but the Commodore 64 had better music. So I used to love listening to some of the music on those early games, and then moved to the Amiga, and then the sound chip on the Amiga was obviously very sophisticated in comparison, and some of the music that used to put out was, Chris Hulsbeck's Turrican 2 soundtrack was an absolute favourite, and I used to make mixtapes. I used to get a cassette recorder and push it up against the TV speaker and just make mixtapes of that sort of stuff. So really got into it then, and then moved on to consoles. And I guess once you hit the era of the Super Nintendo and all the JRPGs and their soundtracks, that's when I really kind of became a massive fan of game music and listened to mostly that. So when most kids were listening to Oasis, I was listening to Uematsu. Being a big fan of game music, I think the big revelation to me many years ago, everything kind of clicked for me, was bizarrely playing Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
Because that had the Michael Giacchino full orchestra soundtrack. When we get to the CD era, going from chip tunes to CDs where you could have fully recorded music, hearing full orchestral soundtracks on video games to me was like, oh my god, this is incredible. This sounds amazing. I think I completely fell in love with that soundscape, thinking not much of it. But then off the back of that, starting to sort of, you do these random internet searches and you start to think, well, people are doing concerts of this in Japan. And then I'm starting to see there's some concerts creeping over to Europe, and there's a concert in London. And then that turned out to be, I think, the very first Distant Worlds concert in London, which I went along to. And listening to it was... you've been to Distant Worlds.
I have, yeah.
So, it's a great fan pleaser. It's the first time I ever went to a big games concert. I thought, this is fantastic. And then I had this really bizarre idea, just randomly. Well, Classic FM, and I didn't really listen to Classic FM, but I was with someone at the time who was a concert violinist. So I used to go to a lot of orchestral concerts, listen to Classic FM. They had their Hall of Fame every year, and I just thought, why is there's plenty of film music in there, and I love some of the John Williams stuff. I mean, who doesn't? But there's no game stuff in there, so why don't we try and put some game stuff in there? And I think this is probably a year or two after the Rage Against the Machine
yes.
campaign to get to Christmas #1. Well, if they can do it, why can't games music does it? I thought, well, I'll just put up a post on a Facebook page and see if I can get some traction off the back of some of my PR contacts in the industry. And it picked up a few stories here, and it picked up a few more posts, and it sort of snowballed a little bit. And then after a week, I saw there were quite a few news stories, lots of people talking about it in forums, and that's the point where I actually called up Classic FM. I got their number, I called them up, and I managed to get through to the editorial team, and I said, hey, are you getting loads of people voting for video game music? And the person at the other end was like, yes, we are. It's really weird. Why are you calling? And it's like, well, that's probably my fault. I just want to make sure, do these votes count, and do you have the music? So I think that's kind of where it went. And that first year, amazingly, people voted for it, and for the very first time, game music was in the Classic FM Hall of Fame. And I like to think that's probably the first time, certainly in the UK, that game music was played on national radio. I genuinely can't. We're talking about 2012 here, so yeah. 12 years ago.
Can you remember what piece was it, and how high did it get?
There were two pieces in the chart that year. The first piece, so it's the top 300, and I think the first piece was the low 200s, and it was Dragonborn from Skyrim.
Interesting. Okay, and Skyrim at that time, it was 2011. It came out, and it's something you've worked on a lot since, actually, with concerts, and we can get to that a bit later. But I think Skyrim was a game that properly crossed over, a bit like Halo, a sort of more mainstream thing, and people had started as well to identify the game by the big Welsh choir kind of shouting and the Fusro Da and all of that become a bit of a meme.
Very much so, and it's an instantly recognisable piece of music, and it was a piece of music that a lot of fans could get behind. I mean, like you say, Skyrim was only a year old at the time, but hugely popular. It picked up enough votes to get in there. I thought, well, that's as big as we're going to get. When I started doing it, I thought we need to pick a track, just one track from one game to people to get behind, because if people start voting for any track, you're not going to get enough votes. So it's a case of just You need a flag bearer. You need something like a guiding star. So the track that I selected was Aerith's theme from Final Fantasy, obviously being a big Uematsu fan and, you know, coming from the Distant Worlds concert. I thought Final Fantasy would come in a similar kind of position. It's always over the Easter holiday, and I was away with the family at the time. This is 2012. So I was away with the family, and I was trying to be with them for the Easter holiday, but at the same time trying to listen to the radio, trying to check every 5 minutes, are we in there? Are we in there? So Friday of that weekend was Skyrim. Went through Friday, nothing for the rest of Friday, nothing for the rest of Saturday, nothing for the rest of Sunday. And I'm thinking, well, it's obviously not got in there.
Yeah.
And as time ticked on, and we were getting into the top 100 and the top 50 and the top 20, and it's like, well, what's going on? And eventually Final Fantasy landed up at, I think, number 16, which is, you know, pretty incredible because it was only the second piece of game music they ever played. I cannot for the life of me remember who the host was who announced it, but I can't remember how they pronounced Uematsu's surname, but it's like, obviously, I've never heard of this composer before. I've never heard of this game. I've never heard of the idea of video game music, but apparently here's a piece that you voted for, and they played the piece, and it was like, wow, that's amazing. It picked up some stories off the back of that.
Orchestra. Now, the wonderful thing about the Classic FM Hall of Fame is that it's your chart. We don't tell you what to choose, instead you tell us what to play. And this year, it's been a particularly interesting countdown. Fans of contemporary composers like Eric Whitacre, Paul Mealer, and Robert John Godfrey have managed to vote new music into our chart for the very first time. There's also been a brass band piece, and on Friday, you may remember, I played you the first ever Hall of Fame entry for a piece of video game music. Now, prestigious orchestras such as the Philharmonia and the London Philharmonic now regularly record video game soundtracks, much like they record film scores. And lots of the music written for these games is really very good. We often say that were Bach or Mozart alive today, they'd be writing film scores instead of cantatas and symphonies. And to be honest, maybe they'd be writing video game soundtracks as well. So this year, spurred on by a very effective campaign on Twitter, fans of the music for the game Final Fantasy VII have had the most remarkable success. They have spread the word about the Classic FM Hall of Fame, and together they have voted the soundtrack to number 16, our second highest new entry. And if you're one of the people who picked this, congratulations on getting this music so high up our chart. The soundtrack was written by the Japanese composer Nobuo Uematsu, and from it here is Aerith's theme.
But I thought next year, okay, well, we'll do it again. I know what I'm doing now. We'll try and push it a bit more. So I kind of really leaned into my PR background and pushed it as much as I can. And then that year, 2013, I can't remember if there's any other pieces in, but the Dragonborn and Final Fantasy pieces did do a bit better because they came 5th and 3rd in the chart, respectively. And I think that makes Uematsu the highest ranked living composer ever in the chart.
Really? That's incredible.
Yeah, but they also beat out Beethoven and Mozart that year.
I mean, the brilliant thing is I remember vividly sitting on my sofa at my parents' house, and my parents both, you know, lifelong classical music fans, and it being on and it coming on, and I could not believe I was recording, like you, Final Fantasy VII music off the TV on cassette back in 97, 98. So to hear it come through the speakers and then see the look of absolute disgust on my mother's face was very satisfying and bewildering, and I had to kind of explain to her, and I think, you know, I've worked at Laced Records now for 7 years or so she's a bit more familiar, and all the efforts we've made to make video games and video game music more acceptable to high society have kicked in. But I just remember that so vividly and being delighted and bemused by it.
I mean, I think a lot of people were delighted, but equally a lot of people were bemused. I mean, particularly in a year where you have 2 pieces of game music in the top 5. I mean, obviously, Classic FM put out their press releases each year on the Hall of Fame, and that was the story. So the following day, every single UK major news source, all the newspapers, all the big mainstream news websites, all covered it. And the story was video game music outstripped Beethoven and Mozart in annual classical music poll. So that was kind of bizarre, but I think it's been really interesting because we've never done as well, but then I've never really kind of pushed people to vote as much as I did that year. That was kind of our Rage Against the Machine moment, if you like.
Were you notorious at Classic FM? Did you feel like you were the face of it, or did it feel like this more kind of grassroots Facebook campaign? And of any kind of potential fist shakers at this happening, what was the thrust of the kind of the backlash, if there was one?
I mean, it was really interesting because on a Classic FM side, I think they were bemused by it, but they were really interested by it because they were suddenly tapping into a huge audience of people that had never even engaged with them as a media before. You know, when they looked at their stats of the age of people voting, but it was like a huge proportion of like under 30 voters voted for a game piece as one of their three choices. And, you know, for any radio station or TV station or any media outlet, suddenly having that kind of audience is huge because it's a massive new outlet for, you know, advertising revenue. It's a massive new outlet for shows you can create for that audience. So they were really, really interested. So from that point of view, they were very quick to reach out to me and to say, you know, we want to know more about this. And I think at the time, they still do, they have their Saturday evening movie show.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it was Howard Goodall was the host at the time. So that first Christmas that Games Music was in the Hall of Fame, I had a message from the current controller of Classic FM, which is Sam Jackson, who is now the controller of BBC Radio 3 and also of the Proms. He reached out to me that Christmas going, we've been trying to work out what we want to do with game music, and I think the best place to put it in is the movie show. And Howard is really keen to do it, so we're going to dedicate an episode of the movie show to game music. But Howard doesn't know a lot about games, so here are the games that we're going to feature. Could you write a few notes about the games, maybe? And so he's got some crib notes, if you like. And I think what they took is they took that Greatest Video Game Music album, the Andrew Skeet one.
Yes.
And he literally just played the album from start to finish. That was the show.
Is that where we come up against the thing that Classic FM need the orchestra to be of some note on the recording for it to be kind of worthy of hitting the sound waves? Is that right?
I think that there may have been an element to that at the time. I think more likely as the album landed across Sam Jackson's desk.
Right, okay. And on that album with things like is it the very first one with like Fair's Super Mario, that kind of thing?
It was the first one, yeah. So I wrote some crib notes for Howard Goodall, the host, and I thought, well, he'll take that and he'll write his script. What I didn't realise is he took my crib notes and that was the script.
Verbatim, yeah. Did you get paid for it?
Literally verbatim. I got a short note saying thanks at the end. But so bizarrely, I wrote the script, I think, for the UK's first video game radio show dedicated to video game music.
That's brilliant.
Which is a bizarre footnote. But, you know, off the back of that really incredible year in 2013, it's been really interesting to see how video game music has spread through that kind of mainstream media. Because, you know, you now have video game shows on all of the radio stations. There are a wealth of really great, like podcasts like this, social channels, events. The way video game music has matured and grown as a genre in the last 10 years has been very gratifying to see. I'm not saying that the Classic FM thing back in all those years ago was part of that. I think it was a really good way of just getting some of those mainstream outlets more comfortable with the idea of it.
I mean, video game music now, of course, as we know, it's a movement, it's a sub-industry, it's its own kind of art form, and then separate from it we have the covers scene, we have the concerts scene, we have the community scene. It has grown arms, legs, and more legs and other limbs and stuff. So It's been a fantastic success. And I think what you realised back then is a key thing, and it's what you and I have known over the years of kind of going to various different video game concerts, is that really it is about the music, but ultimately when it comes to the fandom and also the pushing it into more mainstream attention, it comes down to the actual games and their mainstreamness. So, Distant Worlds, Final Symphony, they work because Final Fantasy, the music of Final Fantasy is just such a wonderful thing, but it's a focal point. And I think what you hit upon to make that a focal point, to make Skyrim, Final Fantasy, two huge IP franchises in the video games world, so easy to get behind. Nowadays fandom for video game music is spread across hundreds of different IP and indie IP as well, like Undertale, Stardew Valley, that kind of thing now. But do you think that to continue the kind of the growth of respect for video game music by other media outlets, by other cultural writers and people, and just the mainstream general public as well, do we still have to peg it, do you think, to those big game IP?
You're absolutely right. I think, because we looked at big game franchises as the peg, it did make it easier, absolutely. To your question now, I would actually flip that question and go, at this point, do we really need to go back and legitimise video game music to those mainstream outlets in quite the same way? I would argue that we've already gone past that point. So do we actually need to go back and do that? I don't think so. I think there are so many ways now to hear video game music. I mean, you have to remember 13 years ago, if you wanted to listen to a piece of orchestral video game music, there were very few outlets for that. There were rips on YouTube, there were MP3s flying around in the dark parts of the internet. But actually getting hold of those soundtracks was normally quite an expensive endeavour because you were having to import them. So, Spotify, although was really starting to kick off, it had no video game music at all. Like there was no way to get hold of that music. So pushing that music onto a mainstream radio station felt like a great thing to do because lots of people listen to mainstream radio. Whereas now, I don't think people do listen to mainstream radio quite as much because they don't really need to, because all the music they want is out there on so many different sources.
It's proliferated in terms of access, and then certainly in the UK, it's easier to talk about UK just because we're both in the UK, but institutions like Abbey Road, like BBC Proms, kind of buying into video game music as a regular thing to feature, to have around, as a regular fixture, just like film music. It's interesting because we had the first prom, was that 2022?
22, I think, yeah.
Which was a interesting programme that kind of hinged around Battlefield 42 in the end. And that was an interesting piece that they chose for that. But I guess there was some feeling that maybe it was because that was a Hollywood, Oscar-winning composer, because they were more recognisable from the film industry. Perhaps they could anchor a games prom, and there hasn't been one announced since. So
I think it's also that the composer actually wrote an original piece of music for a different prom as well. So I think there was already some prom involvement.
Right. Okay.
To your point, the fact that we had a video game prom didn't feel like a strange thing. It didn't feel like it was. I mean, it's about time that there was a video game prom, but it didn't feel out of place in the programme.
Does the next thing that needs to happen maybe is that, because you get things like Doctor Who prom, you get kind of film and TV music based proms based on an IP. Do you think actually maybe instead of a general video game prom where everyone can have their sniffy reaction to the programme, there might be a Final Fantasy prom or I don't know, what's the most mainstream orchestrally based series out there? I can't think of it right now because obviously the biggest game in the world is Grand Theft Auto, things like Minecraft. You could have a Super Mario prom, for instance, after the success of the movie. Maybe that's the next stop.
You could do. I think the difficulty with that is that it's really easy to do a very classical prom because there is no copyright on the music, whereas with And film music has been around for a long time. So performing film music isn't that tricky a thing to do because the music is out there and there are various rights associated to that. I mean, it's easy to get hold of that music and perform it and make sure that whoever needs to get their licensing fee gets it. Whereas video games, I think that live performance element is a little bit behind in terms of how easy it is to do. But I think it's getting better. But I would rather see, instead of a specific game prom, I'd rather see game stuff become more integrated into a more general prom. So if it's a prom about, and I think that they did this last year, right? So if it's a prom about fantasy, then that would have fantasy movie music, that'd have fantasy game music, and then pieces of general classical music or contemporary music based on fantasy themes. I think I'd rather see it so it becomes even less of a video game music as a separate pigeonhole thing.
Yes.
It's another brand of music that gets put in together with everything else.
So having Uematsu alongside some Saint-Saëns and some John Williams or something like that. Normalising it.
Yeah, that's what I'd rather see. And I think that we are starting to see that a lot more because video game music is demystified now in a lot of ways.
This is the 12th year, I think, of the kind of Classic FM Hall of Fame campaign. Do you consider that the campaign is still going in earnest? What kind of position do you want to see certain pieces get to this year?
To be honest, I haven't really pushed it as a campaign very much in the last few years. What I wanted to see happen was to get to a point where I didn't actually have to say to anyone, hey, the Classic FM Hall of Fame is happening, go and vote for video game music. I wanted to be a point where people listen to that station because they love music, and some of the music they love happens to be games music, so that they feel when I'm picking the pieces I'm voting for, one of those might be a piece of film music, one of them might be a piece of contemporary classical music, one of them might be a piece of game music. Like you say, it's normalising it, and I think we kind of reached that point a few years ago. There are a lot of pieces of games music that came in and went out. There's some that have been there for a long time that just stick in there. Like Final Fantasy, I think, and I hope, will always be in there, because there are enough fans of that. There are fans of Final Fantasy music, as well as lots of other kinds of music, but it's just one of those ones that always comes up for them.
And the advantage is, of course, that it feels like people are voting for the whole of Final Fantasy. Okay, maybe Uematsu's large slice of it, but they're not just voting for one piece like Aeris theme, Final Fantasy main theme or something. They are turning up to represent for the whole series.
Exactly. Which I think is a good thing, because it helps consolidate votes in a way.
Indeed. And of course, there's the side battle of Kingdom Hearts and Yoko Shimomura.
Yeah, I think last year, or maybe the year before, was the first year that Shimomura came higher than Uematsu.
There's no denying Dearly Beloved, because even my 5-year-old bullies me to play it on piano and wants to sit down and learn it because it's...
Well, there you go.
The most simple and wonderful melody ever, and there's been some nice orchestral arrangements along the way as well, and she's a classical standard pianist as well, so she has some advantages in some ways over Uematsu, in the fact that she can turn up and helm a Final Fantasy concert at Abbey Road, things like that, and give it a slightly more classical sheen. But of course, Uematsu's not to be outdone, because he's also working on some original orchestral music due to debut this year. Is that right?
Incidentally, on the Shimomura piece, one of the reasons I think that Shimomura came higher than Uematsu is that Kingdom Hearts fans are very dedicated.
Be careful what you say there.
Very dedicated. I mean, I like Kingdom Hearts, but the hardcore Kingdom Hearts fans are very dedicated. So through many years of pushing this campaign, certainly those early years, I became friends with Thomas Blocker, who obviously, he is Merignon Studios, who put the Final Symphony concert together and has since put together Merignon, which is this wonderful... I like to call it Peter and the Wolf for the PlayStation generation. So it's essentially a story set to music. So the first Merignon came out or premiered a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and the music was written by Yoko Shimomura. And it's this wonderful kind of combination of wonderful melodies, really beautiful visuals and really lovely story, and it's designed for a whole family audience. So it's quite short, and it is the kind of perfect introduction to that orchestral sound for school children, younger children, and a new one is coming out, and I'm talking for Thomas here, a new one, Married on Heart of Ice, and the music is by Nobuo Uematsu, and it's premiering in Germany on February 29th. And I'll be there. I'm going. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm very excited about it. I've heard the music.
Ooh. You've heard original Nobuo Uematsu score that unheard by the rest of the world?
I think it's some of the freshest composing that Uematsu has done in many years, without the constraints of a video game. It's really, really lovely and exciting and heartfelt and moving, and I can't wait to hear it live. And I'm really interested to see if these kind of shorter original concerts will take off, that have the backing of composers from the video game world, so they have that kind of built-in audience where they'll take off on a larger scale. I think a lot of orchestras are looking for fresh and interesting original pieces of music, and I feel like this is a great way of doing it.
I can think of several composers, Grant Kirkhope's of this world, Gareth Coker's, who would love a stab at that, that palette, and not being bound by the conventions of having to put things in stems for video games or, short cutscenes and things like that. They'd probably love to have a go. Have you been checking out any of the non-classical kind of arrangement stuff? I'm thinking of the things like the 8-bit big band. They won a Grammy, of course. Other genres, traditional genres, older music genres where video game music has really started to penetrate. Like there's talk of there being a kind of a jazz reel book of video game music, like standard classics that people who play video game music, who are also jazz musicians, those are the pieces they're going to go back to because audiences will recognise them. Do you think maybe that's the next campaign, is whatever the biggest jazz station is needs to play 8-bit big band, if they haven't already?
I would love to hear that stuff on a wider scale. And I think a lot of video game music translates to that really well. For the reason you say, I think if you go to a jazz club and you start hearing... here's a great example. One of the things other things that's really interesting that's happened in video game music over the last years is it's now part of most music educational syllabuses.
I didn't know that.
So, GCSE Music now has a video game section. A lot of schools' orchestras are starting to perform bits of video game music as part of their repertoire because, it's great fun music to perform, but also it's music that the kids playing will recognise. So they have an instant connection to it, as opposed to, I think, some of the more older classical stuff where they won't have the same kind of connection. I remember going to a school's concert my son was performing in, and as I walked in, I heard a school jazz band performing something from Mario 64, which it sounded great. I can't remember the name of the piece. It's the music that plays in the first world of Mario 64, but it was instantly recognisable. To your point, if you go to any kind of music event and people are just playing covers and they suddenly throw in a video game cover that everyone knows, then I think people are going to go mad for it. Like that's the whole point of this. It's making game music mainstream to the point of no one bats an eyelid if someone does an arrangement of Star Wars or Pirates of the Caribbean, and no one should bat an eyelid if someone does an arrangement of something from Legend of Zelda, because those pieces of music are so ingrained into so many people now.
I would argue that we're almost there with the Super Mario theme, maybe. And yes, Zelda is, of course, insanely popular. Maybe they're not as famous as the Star Wars theme yet, or the Avengers theme, or Back to the Future, the really most mainstream?
I don't know. I reckon you could go onto the streets, and I reckon if you asked 100 people to hum the theme from Zelda and then hum the theme from the Avengers, I reckon they would do Zelda more.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing is there's been so many Zelda games at this point and so many different Zelda kind of scores as well. I wonder, though, are we still waiting for the John Williams of video games music to really emerge, like the composer that is known everywhere, working on the game's IP that is known everywhere? Next year, we'll see the launch of GTA 6, which will be an enormous mainstream cultural event. Music will be a huge part of that, but of course it will be kind of cutting edge. You know, it will be hip hop, it will be rock, it will be pop. All of that circling around the radio stations and whoever, you know, contributes original music, whichever pop stars turn up in the game and that kind of thing. Is the more orchestral side of video game music still waiting for its big household name composer, do you think?
I think it's less about having a household name. I think it's more the fact that orchestral music is probably always going to be less mainstream than hip hop, and it's so from that point, it's less about has it got its big name composer. I mean, I would still argue Uematsu is there. I think most people, even people who don't really follow video game music, but who know video games generally, they'll know Final Fantasy. They may know the name Uematsu
or Koji Kondo, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. So I think it's less about will we have a big name composer or cut through. I think it's more, you know, will that orchestral stuff be seen on the same level as a hip hop album? Probably not. No, that's not a problem. I think any way that the world of video games and music cross over in an interesting way is a good thing anyway. I mean, you just look at the biggest announcement of the last week, and there's been lots of big announcements this last week, but Lady Gaga on Fortnite is just an amazing and fascinating crossover of those two worlds that is working on a mainstream level. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. Famously, Grand Theft Auto 3 had a classical music station, which might have been the first time a lot of young people heard particular classical pieces. Maybe you need to start a campaign to Rockstar to get classical music back into GTA.
Oh, I should try that. That's a plan.
Well, thanks very much, Mark, for coming on GXM. People should vote, definitely, for some video game music in the Classic FM Hall of Fame. When is the cut-off date?
So the cut-off date is the 15th of March, so you don't have long. The voting website is halloffame.classicfm.com. So they have a lot of video game music in the voting database, or you can put your own choices in. You can free enter. Or, you know, you don't have to vote for game music. There's all kinds of music in there, but it would be nice to vote for game music because it would be nice to still see game music in the Classic FM Hall of Fame because it deserves to be there because it's great music, and I like to see great music championed and highlighted in this way.
Is there a smaller game, Mark, that you would love to see, like in your perfect world, that you would love to see kind of get up there, like a much smaller game, you know, lower profile composer that you think deserves to be there?
That's a great question. I think the one thing that's never been in there that I would love to see in there is going right back to where I started, which is the Medal of Honor soundtrack, which I'd love to see in there. I think one of the highlights of my life was I went to Giacchino's 50th birthday concert. So he held a concert for himself on his 50th birthday, and he held it at the Royal Albert Hall.
As you do.
And it was kind of interesting because one of the Muppets was there as well. I can't remember which one. Gonzo from the Muppets was there.
Safe choice.
But it was a concert of all his music over the years, and you know, it was stuff like Lost and The Incredibles and Up, Jurassic World, and all sorts of stuff. But the first piece that was played was the main theme from Medal of Honor.
Wow!
So right back to the beginning of his career, it's the first time I've ever heard it live, which was really special. But it kind of just brought it all back because that was kind of the piece of music that really got me on this path. So that was great. So I'd like to see that in there, but how many people think back to Medal of Honor's soundtrack and think, I'll vote for that? Probably not many in this day and age, but it is a really great soundtrack, and I believe it's all on Spotify, so it's well worth listening to.
We're going to move on now to Done in 60 Seconds, where we take a minute to recommend something to each other. I'm going to start with what happens to be a laced release, but I promise it's because it's an amazing soundtrack that I fell in love with. That's the reason I'm bringing it up. Okay, Ultros is a psychedelic Metroidvania that very recently came out. It has art by El Huevo, Nicolas Orcablad, who is famous for his covers for the Hotline Miami games and associated artwork. He worked on some of the artwork for the Hotline Miami vinyl sleeves for us and for Laced Records and I8Bit over the years. Incredibly talented painter and artist and now game developer. The soundtrack is by a chap called Oscar Rydelius, who goes under Rat Vader. Laced put out the digital and vinyl soundtrack, or announced the vinyl soundtrack, and I just fell in love. It's just such an amazing chill out new age record with organic sounds and live recorded instruments and weird soundscapes. It's beautiful. There's a track that's 13 minutes long, and that's what we're going to listen to a snip of. This is Uji Saint.
That is a very bold choice to start an album with a 13-minute song. That is my first time listening to this properly. I think I'm going to treat myself to a long walk while the weather is still cold and take the full album in and try and imagine myself in the icy landscape of Gothenburg, which is where the composer's from, is worth mentioning. Apparently not. That's where the game is set, because that'd be a very different game. Right, so I've got a bit of a left field choice today, but not in the sense of the Japanese hard-hitting techno bangers that I normally drop. This is an orchestral arrangement of a Final Fantasy game, not Final Fantasy 7 or 10 or 13. This is actually Crystal Chronicles, which was released on the GameCube, has a gorgeous Celtic soundtrack that does not get enough attention. The reason I wanted to share this particular cover of the game's kind of like main theme is because it features Floor Jansen from the symphonic metal band Nightwish, and she does an absolutely incredible job of nailing the vocals in this.
If it's not 90s house remixes of obscure Japanese video games, then a metal Celtic crossover of a Final Fantasy track is so you, Matt. It should be written on your tombstone.
There we go.
Here lies a fan of metal Celtic music and fun. No, that's a really fantastic version. I mean, the range on Floor Jansen's voice is insane. And it's just very tasteful. That's quite an old track now, I guess. I think 2007 it looks like. So Does that count? That's in the Mat retro range, I guess. Now that's old enough.
I am classing pre-2000 as kind of the nostalgic. That's my VGMDB search. It's always pre-2000 when I'm looking for little techno bangers and house tunes.
Real Retronaut says anything older than 10 years is retro, which means GTA 5 is officially retro, as is The Last of Us and many others. Scary times, getting older, years go by. Right, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for on GXM 22. Thanks so much for joining us as we explore the intersection between video games and music. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us, if you'd be so kind, leave us a review on your podcast service of choice, especially Apple Podcasts. That would really, really help. More than that, please just share the word. Let someone else know about the podcast. Give them a chance to hear our dulcet tones talk about video games and music for a short while. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram and Threads at GXM Podcast. I'm at T Quillfeldt on X Twitter. That's TQILLFELDT. Matt is at Mat Ombler on Twitter. That's Matt with only one T. If you have any feedback, please do hit us up at gxmpodcast@gmail.com or on any of those other channels. We'd love to hear from you. This episode was produced by both of us. It was edited by me. Music is by Zach Foster and our show art is by Joshua Klein. I'd like to thank Mark Robbins for coming on as our interviewee this time. Well, thank you very much for talking to me, Mark. Is there... I will...